Please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
When Kawasaki launched the Vulcan 650 in India, one story became possible. The story of the 4 Kawasaki's that belong to the same 650cc family. These motorcycles, the Z650, Ninja 650, Versys 650 and the Vulcan 650. Today let's talk about how they became sisters and brothers of each other, how Kawasaki created 4 different motorcycles from what is effectively the same platform. The family began in 2006 when the Kawasaki Ninja 650R came out, and since then there have been updates as well as new family members. Today, all 4 siblings share a near identical liquid-cooled 649cc engine, and I was shocked to see it, but the exact same 6-speed gearbox and the same sprockets. And yet, when you ride them, the Ninja 650 and the Z650 are virtually the same motorcycle apart from the 6 kilos on the Ninja for the fairing. But when you ride this, it's such a dramatic difference because the lack of a fairing, the different handlebar, makes this feel lighter, more compact and more easy to control. But the important thing to understand is when you compare it, for example, to the Vulcan. Remember, all 4 Kawasaki's have exactly the same gearbox, all the ratios are the same. But can you imagine what the difference between riding the Vulcan and the Z650 is? Massive! There are slight differences in the engines, of course. The Vulcan makes less power and torque but gets more torque low down, whereas the Versys engine has the most horsepower to manage its heavier weight. And since the Ninja and the Z are one update cycle fresher than the other 2, there are updates to their throttle bodies as well. But does their styling make a difference as well? Now we've got 2 motorcycles that are absolutely identical to each other, the Ninja 650 and the Z650. You'd be surprised at how much difference the fairing makes. Now obviously, wind blast is one thing, right? If you're out on the highway, you're going 120 steady, you're going to feel it, and at 7 hours in, it hurts. This bike prevents that from happening by giving you a screen. But you'd be amazed at what a fairing like that does for you, because when you sit here, the fairing's farther away from you and you get the sense that you're sitting on a larger, more comfortable machine. But look at the spec, it's exactly the same except for the 6 kilo difference that comes from the fairing between the Z and the Ninja. But if you look closer, the Z650 only differs from the Ninja in weight and has marginally more responsive steering geometry numbers as befits its role as a street naked. But they're so close in their real-world performance intent that Kawasaki can run virtually the same suspension on both of these motorcycles. But when you bring the Vulcan and the Versys, a cruiser and an adventure tourer into the picture, the differences in the suspension are more pronounced. After all, that's where a substantial part of the ability to do a bike's role comes from, right? I'm going to use Surprise, the Vulcan, as an example to discuss the suspension on the 4 motorcycles. Which one do you think has the most suspension travel? The Versys does, exactly. But guess who comes in second when it comes to front suspension travel? That's the Vulcan. It's got 130 mm of travel. Surprised? Well, that's because it's also got 31 degrees of rake versus 24 and 25 for the other bikes. And now that you've inclined this suspension to get wheel travel, an appreciable amount of wheel travel, you have to have longer travel in a diagonal line. That's how suspension is designed. This one needs to do a job for which the wheel needs to move a certain amount. But at this rake angle, Kawasaki has to give it longer travel. And at the other end of the Vulcan, the low-slung design as well as the good road riding focus of the cruiser format shows in the 80 mm of rear wheel travel. That's a lot less than all of the other motorcycles. And now, can you see a pattern emerging? Each component of each motorcycle, from styling elements to more serious parts like suspension, are added, removed or tuned to produce a specific benefit required for that motorcycle's role. It's a delicate exercise in packaging as well as cost management.
The Versys is a good example of how packaging is done. If you look at the frame, there is one additional structural member that's arrived, but look at the package. They needed more ground clearance. It got 170 mm versus 130 for all of the rest. It's got a taller seat height, the tallest here. It's got a tall handlebar, biggest fuel tank. But the most important thing is because the Versys has to do the hardest job of all of these three in terms of terrain, it's got the best suspension by far. It makes the Versys more expensive, but it makes it the best ride of all of these. And in fact, the Versys is better at ride than most of the motorcycles you can name in the Indian market.
Now, since the four motorcycles' actual performance is clustered pretty close together, I mean your horsepower range is 61 to 69 PS and your torque range is 63 to 66 Nm, the front brake specification, for example, can be extremely similar. But the Versys, the adventure tourer, can reasonably be expected to be ridden more often with luggage and/or pillion. On the other hand, the Vulcan actually carries more weight on the rear wheel, and therefore, the front wheel on the Vulcan only has a single 300 mm front disc. But both the Vulcan and the Versys get a larger rear disc brake than the Ninja or the Z. Platforms allow manufacturers to use a slew of common parts to reduce cost. But clever engineering and design is required to make sure that each part that is different, that's cost and complexity added, produces a step in the direction of the role that the company has in mind for that final product. In Kawasaki's 650cc twin-cylinder family, remarkably similar engines and frames use small tweaks as well as large changes in crucial areas like suspension or the actual tire use to produce motorcycles that feel very, very different from each other.
I still find it amazing that Kawasaki and other manufacturers like Kawasaki can create such diverse experiences from what is effectively the same bowl of ingredients. The difference between riding a Versys, a Vulcan and a Z are so different from each other. It boggles the mind, and so little changes with so much thought goes into it. Amazing, isn't it?